The first exercise will help you understand how the camera settings affect the flash and the ambient lighting. For this, you must put an object nearby, just like I did here with this figure, okay? It's about 1 meter away from the camera and it will be lightened by the flash. The wall behind it is farther back so that the ambient lighting is at a distance. By using the different camera settings, we'll see what happens with the flash and the foreground lighting and what happens with the ambient lighting at the background. This way, you're going to learn how far the flash can reach and how can you lighten or darken the background. Okay, so now we are going to begin by taking a picture without the flash. Okay, first without flash, just with the ambient lighting so that we can see which settings we need and how the picture ends up. As I'm using a tripod, I've set up the ISO at 100, the aperture at 5.6, because I want to have some blur in the background because of the lack of light, and I'm using a speed of 1/15. Okay, let me take a picture, just testing, okay? Focus on the on the foreground, and alright. Without flash, as the speed wasn't very high, the background is okay because the camera took into account the ambient lighting, so the picture is good. But what's the only issue? That there isn't much light where the figure is. We turned off the lights of this room and the figure ends up being a bit dark. So let's now take a picture with the flash. You'll see that the foreground is much lighter now. The figure receives the light emitted by the flash and the background looks the same as before because we are using a slow speed setting. If we take a look at the light meter of the camera, as there is not much light here, it will tell you to use a slow speed setting. Slower speeds always help us capture the actual lighting of the scene. This time, I agreed to what the light meter told me. But there is an advantage when working with a flash. You can't forget about the light meter. It's true. Don't throw your hands up. Try increasing the shutter speed to 1/200. The light meter will tell you to decrease it. Of course, the shutter speed will open and close too fast, and the light will come back for a lesser amount of time, and if you don't use flash, the picture will end up a bit too dark. But as I told you before, the camera only measures the ambient lighting. It doesn't take into account the flash. So, given that we are using the flash, even though the camera is telling us that will be an underexposure, the picture will end up being fine and the foreground will have a good lighting. Take a picture. Now check the result. The figure received the light from the flash, but not the background, because we increased the shutter speed to the maximum allowed in conjunction with the flash, which may vary depending on the camera. Some of them allow 1/200, others 250, others 160, and the mirrorless ones probably won't have any limit. In any case, with higher speeds, you can darken the background, and you can see it by yourself. The flash lightens the figure, but the background is dark. So the shutter speed helps you with two things: regulating the ambient lighting, and in the case of slower speeds, getting a lighter background. But the movement plays a part in this as well. Taking a picture with flash and a high speed will result in a static picture, but taking it with a slow speed allows us to play with moving elements, but we'll see it later, okay? Let's continue with the second exercise to see how the aperture works. If I agree with the light meter and set the speed to 1/15, we'll get a lighter background, and the figure will also receive the light from the flash. If we use a higher speed, we'll get a darker background. Now, let's try setting the speed as told by the light meter. But instead of having an open aperture, which allows the flash to have a proper reach, and as a result the figure is lightened, try closing the aperture as much as you can. In my case, I'm using a setting of f36, which is the maximum I can set at a focal distance of 55 millimeters. Okay, take a picture with this aperture setting. You'll see that the whole scene is dark, and we only changed the aperture setting. In fact, the light meter is asking me to modify it because there isn't much light reaching the camera. The aperture controls the reach of the flash. If we put the figure farther away, the flash won't reach it. If we close the aperture too much. But in our case, the figure is close to us. What do we do to make the figure have a nice lighting on the picture? There are two options. Either we put the figure closer to us, or we open the aperture a bit more. I'm going to try setting it to f22. The figure is lighter now. I'm going to open the aperture again to f11, and the figure is even lighter. Actually, the background too, because more light is reaching the camera. It's important to know that if you're working at a distance of 2 or 3 meters, you shouldn't close the aperture too much, because the flash is not that powerful. If you're working at a higher distance, you would need external studio flashes, because they are more powerful. For the built-in flash of our camera, only short distances, especially if you're going to close the aperture a lot, because you need to work with a higher depth of field, okay? Let's try a different thing. We've already seen how the aperture affects the picture at a slower speed, so I'm going to set the flash sync speed to the maximum, which is 1 divided 200, and the aperture to f5.6, and take the picture. The background is dark because we have a high speed, but the figure is lighter because we have an open aperture. Try closing the aperture. In this case, the background is still dark, and the figure won't appear as lightened as before. This means that you need to be careful with the aperture settings if the person or object you are taking the picture of is far away. If you close the aperture too much, the light won't even reach a distance of 1 meter, okay? When working with the aperture, you need to have in mind that it has an influence on the ambient lighting as well as the reach of the light emitted by the flash. The shutter speed only affects the ambient lighting, but not the light from the flash. But the aperture does, so watch out. And what about the ISO? It's similar to the aperture. It affects the ambient lighting and the light from the flash. This is because the power of the flash is optimal to work with an ISO of 100. If this value is 2 stops higher, the relative power of the flash is also higher. For example, with an ISO of 100, the guide number of the flash would be 13 or 14. With an ISO of 200 and then 400, that guide number is doubled. So 26 instead of 13 and 28 instead of 14. In short, the ISO has an influence on the relative power of the flash, but it also affects the ambient lighting. What are we going to do now? We are going to try this. Let's set up a high speed and take a picture. The figure appears lighter because of the flash, and the background is dark. Now increase the ISO by 2 stops. So, from 100 to 400, the speed is still the same and the aperture setting too, but the picture ended up being lighter than before. Right? Can you say it? The difference is huge. And now we're going to increase the ISO by 2 stops again. So from 400 to 1600. Did you see how the ambient lighting is even more noticeable now? Increase it by 2 stops once again. 6400. And take a picture. Even lighter than before. In fact, this is too much sensitivity and we are getting a bit of an overexposure. So, if you want to lighten the foreground, enable the flash if the lighting is not optimal and don't close too much the aperture. On the other hand, let's say that you're out at night and you want to have a picture taken of yourself in front of a monument with its own lighting. The flash will light you up, but not that monument in the background. So you'll need to adjust the shutter speed and ISO settings, okay? This is really useful to know, okay? What would happen in the case of this room? We can play with the ISO and the shutter speed in order to have a lighter background. I wouldn't increase the ISO too much because it generates noise. I would rather adjust the shutter speed. It's a matter of finding a good balance. For example, a slightly higher sensitivity but a slightly lower speed. This would result in a good lighting in both the foreground and the background. Okay? Here, for example, an ISO of 1600 would be more than enough. Let's continue with another exercise to see where you can adjust the power of the flash on the menu. When is it a good time to modify the power? Well, in those cases where the object on the foreground ends up too light on the picture and you want to take away some of the light emitted by the flash. Or also in those cases where you're going to reflect the light of the flash. Let me change this object so that you can practice with exposure compensation. Let's look on the menu for the flash settings. In this kind of model, there's a section called Flash Control, which is here. You will probably find it easily on the menu, otherwise look for shortcut references on the user guides. Let me go to the built-in flash settings. Inside, there are two interesting things. First, let's talk about the exposure compensation. You'll see something similar to the light meter, ranging from -2 to 2. It's in fact similar to the light meter because we can adjust the amount of light, but this time only for the flash. I'm going to take a picture with the exposure compensation set to 0. Okay, I'm also going to adjust the speed as suggested by the camera. And the ISO will be at 200, for example. The speed is 25. Okay, picture taken. The figure has been lightened up with the default intensity. Remember that the flash works in TTL mode, which means that the light emitted is automatically adjusted. Sometimes the result is okay, but others not, especially with white or black surfaces. If the result is not the intended, you can fix it with exposure compensation. I'm going to reduce the power of the flash to -1, and I'm going to take the picture again. You'll see a little loss of light on the foreground. The background looks the same, but the object is a bit darker. Let's try with -2 now so that we can see the difference even more. Exactly, the object is much darker. So, what is the exposure compensation good for? It's good to reduce the effect of the flash on the picture. The best thing is to strike a balance between the ambient lighting and the flash. That is, the flash should help, but it shouldn't be much noticeable. As a result, you get a more natural picture and the light of the flash is not overwhelming. Let's go now to the menu, Flash Control, between Flash Settings, and let's increase the exposure compensation to +1. You'll see that the object appears much lighter. Now set it to the maximum and take another picture. Okay, even lighter. Depending on your needs, this could be useful for you or not. Now, there is an interesting technique and it's called bounce flash. If you have a built-in flash in your camera, you won't be able to move it. If you had a hot shoe flash, it would be easier to point it to the direction you want, as well as modifying its intensity. However, I'm going to teach you a little trick to modify the intensity of a built-in flash. We're going to practice the bounce flash technique. I suggest that you use a piece of white opaque cardboard. You need another white surface, which can be another piece of cardboard, a foam board, a reflector, or even a wall. Okay? Alright, so I'm going to place this cardboard at an angle so that it receives the light emitted by the flash and deflect it toward the white surface. What will we achieve with this? We'll lighten the object from the side. Please note the difference between using the flash normally with an exposure compensation of +2 and this side flash. The lighting is more natural and smoother, and the shadows define the volume of the object much better. So by using an exposure compensation of +2, you get a more intense flash, which is useful for the bounce flash technique. And in this case, you only need a simple accessory like this. Okay, we could try to deflect the light upwards, but the ceiling is much farther and the loss of light is higher. Anyways, we would get a different lighting on the object too. To reduce the intensity of the flash and get more natural results, apart from the exposure compensation, there are other alternatives. For example, you can use silk paper to act as a diffuser. You can purchase actual diffusers for your camera, but if you can't afford that, you can use any kind of object with a bit of transparency so that it blocks part of the light. It's important it's slightly transparent, okay? If not, it doesn't work. Let me take a picture using the flash normally, okay? And now another picture with this silk paper in front of the flash. You'll notice that there's a loss in the intensity of the flash, similar to what happens if you lower the exposure compensation. In this case, we are just letting the light pass through this paper. Even a tissue may work, so budget is not a problem at all. Okay? Let's leave the diffusers and the exposure compensation aside now. Also, make sure that you leave the exposure to 0 again, unless you're going to keep taking pictures with a different setting in mind. So, now we're going to see how to work with the flash and slow speed setting. Okay? In the flash settings, you'll find something called first curtain and second curtain. On some Nikon cameras, you may find rear curtain instead of second curtain, but this depends on the model, as I always say. And what is first curtain and second curtain? Your camera works using a flash sync speed. which syncs the flash with the shutter. It activates the moment before taking the picture. As soon as the shutter opens, the flash emits the light, and that will be the first curtain. What is the second curtain good for? First, you need to be working with slower speeds because otherwise it won't be noticeable. So when working with slower speeds, we can make the flash emit a light at the end of the shot. What for? To create some effects. So, get ready to do an exercise so that you can see the difference between the first curtain and second one. Okay, let's see the difference between the first curtain and the second one. In other words, the timing of the flash. It's very important that you use a slow speed. I will set a speed of 1 second. It's more than enough time to take a picture of a moving object and see if that object appears at the beginning of the movement or at the end. Let's try the first curtain. I'll be using a box with a text that emits light, because I'll be switching off the lights of the room. As I'm working with a slow speed, if I leave the lights on, there will be an overexposure because the ISO is set to 100 and the aperture to 8. I suggest that you try this in a dark environment. In my case, I'll turn the lights off. Also, as the box emits light, we'll be able to see the movement in its entirety. At the end, we'll check whether the flash acted at the beginning or at the end of it. Okay, so first curtain now. ISO to 100, f8 and 1 second. I'm going to take a picture. During the movement, if we are using the first curtain, the box appears still at the beginning and then the trail of that movement to the right. More to the right, okay? Now let's try the second curtain. Set it on the menu and take another picture of the moving object. You'll probably need some tries to get the hang of it. So what do we see? The trail of the movement is at the beginning and the box appears still at the end. Remember that this second curtain only works when you're using slower speeds. With 0.5 seconds or 0.25 seconds or quicker, the movement must be much faster too. With 1 second or slower, you'll see the trail perfectly and where the flash freezes the movement. By default, you can set the camera to use the first curtain, as most of the times we'll need the flash to act at the beginning. I'm going to place a different object in front of me before we start, okay? Let's finish this lesson by learning how to modify the color of the light emitted by the flash. These you see here are filters that are normally used with hot shoe flashes, but you can use them by placing them in front of the built-in flash too. Apart from these filters, you may use things like the cover of your cell phone if it has some kind of color transparency. Any colored surface with transparency will do the work. I'm going to use the settings that the camera suggests me with this ambient lighting. So, an ISO of 100, an aperture of 5.6, and a speed of 1/15. If I take a picture without any filter, there won't be anything out of the ordinary. I'm going to try again with this red filter, see? As we are working with a slow speed, the color is affecting the object on the foreground, but not the ambient lighting on the background, sorry. If we use a different color, something similar will happen. The background won't be affected because it's too far and the flash can't reach there. So, by using different colors, you'll get different results on the foreground that is, different dominant colors. If you like experimenting with the colors and the flash, you could get a foreground lightened by a color flash and a background with its ambient lighting. This also allows us to play around with the white balance. For example, if I change the settings from daylight to tungsten and take a picture with the flash, the picture will look bluish. That's because the tungsten setting applies a blue tone to compensate for the warm colors on the ambient lighting. And now guys, try using a red filter and then you'll get red tones on the foreground and blue tones on the background, see? Two different colors on the same scene. Guys, give it a try and experiment with the flash, the colors, the white balance and the ambient lighting. We'll do one more exercise outdoors now to talk about the field flash and what happens when there is too much light. We've come here to do an exercise about the field flash and see what happens when there is a big difference in light. For example, we have here a very light landscape, right? If we place a person here and we want to take a picture of him or her with this landscape on the background, that person would look a bit in shadow because the sun is behind the landscape. That's the perfect chance to use the field flash. It's a type of built-in flash that isn't so powerful, but it's more than enough to help you in these occasions. So let's take a picture of our friend Piki to see what happens when we don't use the flash. Obviously, he will look a bit dark, but then we'll take another picture using the field flash and we'll see that both him and the landscape will look fine. When working with a flash, you need to take into account the maximum sync speed. Also know that when using the field flash, the object shouldn't be placed too far because the flash will only lighten what's near, be it a person or friend Piki, whoever or wherever. Never try to lighten things that are too far away from the camera, like for example this landscape, because the flash won't reach it. Okay?